Have you ever wondered what happens to ghost towns when the last living soul finally leaves? What if I told you that sometimes they don't actually leave at all? Tonight I'm taking you on a journey down the most haunted stretch of America's Mother Road, where a sheriff's unexplained disappearance in the 1970s still echoes through the desert wind, and where travelers today report seeing patrol car headlights flashing in the darkness with no one behind the wheel. This is the story of Redwater, a forgotten town on Route 66, and the lawman who may still be walking his beat 50 years after vanishing without a trace. Picture this. You're driving down a desolate two-lane highway. Nothing but endless desert stretching in every direction. Your engine starts sputtering, then dies completely. You coast to a stop, and suddenly you notice something in the distance that wasn't on any map. A cluster of weathered buildings, their windows dark as empty eye sockets, sitting like a scar on the landscape. Welcome to Redwater. Population 0. But Redwater wasn't always a ghost town. In its heyday, during the Route 66 boom, this little desert community was a vital rest stop for travelers crossing the American Southwest. Gas stations, diners, and motor lodges lined the main drag, serving thousands of road-weary passengers every month. The town had everything a traveler needed, including law enforcement, in the form of Sheriff Marcus Coleman, a man who took his duty to protect both locals and visitors very seriously. Sheriff Coleman was what you'd call old-school law enforcement. He knew every resident by name, every business owner personally, and every inch of highway in his jurisdiction. Travelers often spoke fondly of the friendly sheriff who'd tip his hat and offer directions, sometimes even escorting broken-down motorists to the local garage. For nearly 15 years, Marcus Coleman was Redwater's guardian angel, ensuring that everyone who passed through his town did so safely. But something changed in the early 1970s. The interstate highway system was reshaping America's travel patterns, and Route 66 was slowly becoming obsolete. Towns that had thrived on highway traffic began withering as drivers took faster routes that bypassed these small communities entirely. Redwater felt the impact immediately. Businesses started closing, families moved away seeking opportunities elsewhere, and the once bustling Main Street grew quieter with each passing month. Sheriff Coleman watched his town dying around him, but he refused to abandon his post. Even as the population dwindled and the county considered closing the sheriff's station, Coleman insisted on maintaining his patrol routes. He'd drive the empty streets at night, checking on the few remaining businesses and residents, his headlights cutting through the growing darkness that seemed to swallow more of his town each day. Then, on a cold November night in 1974, Sheriff Marcus Coleman disappeared. The last confirmed sighting was around midnight when Old Pete, who ran the dying gas station, saw Coleman's patrol car heading west out of town on its usual route. The sheriff was supposed to check in with the county dispatcher at 2 a.m., but that call never came. When morning arrived and there was still no word, a search party was organized. They found Coleman's patrol car 3 miles outside Redwater, parked perfectly straight on the shoulder of the highway. The engine was still warm, the keys in the ignition, and all of Coleman's equipment was exactly where it should be. His radio was functioning, his weapon was holstered, and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if Sheriff Marcus Coleman had simply stepped out of his vehicle and vanished into the desert air. The investigation that followed turned up nothing substantial. No evidence of foul play, no indication that Coleman had planned to disappear, and no logical explanation for why an experienced lawman would abandon his patrol car in the middle of nowhere. Search teams scoured hundreds of square miles of desert, but Marcus Coleman was never found. Officially, the case remains open to this day, though it's been decades since anyone actively investigated. But here's where the story takes a turn toward the impossible. Within months of Coleman's disappearance, Redwater's last residents packed up and left. The town that had been slowly dying finally breathed its last breath, leaving behind empty buildings and sun-bleached memories. Route 66 was officially decommissioned in 1985, and Redwater became just another forgotten dot on maps that nobody used anymore. Yet something strange began happening to travelers who found themselves stranded near the old town.
The first reports came in the early 1980s. Motorists with car trouble would describe seeing headlights in their rearview mirrors approaching slowly from the direction of Redwater. They'd expect to see a tow truck or Good Samaritan, but as the lights drew closer, they'd realize they were looking at an old police cruiser, exactly like the one Sheriff Coleman had been driving the night he disappeared in 1974. But here's the part that makes your skin crawl. When these stranded travelers would try to flag down the patrol car for help, the headlights would simply stop moving. The car would sit there in the darkness, lights on, engine running, but completely empty. No driver visible behind the windshield, no movement inside the vehicle at all. After several minutes, the headlights would begin flashing in a rhythmic pattern, as if sending some kind of signal, before the entire apparition would simply fade away. These encounters follow a remarkably consistent pattern. The phantom patrol car only appears to people who are genuinely stranded or in need of help, always approaching from Redwater's direction, always stopping just out of clear viewing distance. Witnesses describe hearing the rumble of the engine and seeing the distinctive light bar on the roof, but they can never make out any details of the interior. Some brave souls have actually walked toward the ghostly police car, hoping to get help or at least solve the mystery. Every single person who's attempted this reports the same unsettling experience. As soon as they get within about 50 feet of the vehicle, the headlights begin flashing more rapidly, almost frantically, as if warning them to stay back. Those who continue approaching find that the car seems to retreat, always maintaining that 50-foot distance until both the witness and the phantom cruiser are swallowed by the desert darkness. Local paranormal investigators have documented over 40 separate encounters with Redwater's phantom sheriff over the past 4 decades. The sightings are so consistent and well documented that they've attracted attention from researchers across the country. What's particularly intriguing is that many witnesses had never heard of Sheriff Coleman or his disappearance before their encounters. Yet their descriptions of the patrol car match perfectly with the vehicle he was driving that November night in 1974. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these encounters is what happens next. Every single person who's reported seeing the phantom patrol car has later discovered that their supposedly broken-down vehicle starts perfectly fine the next morning. Dead batteries are suddenly charged, empty gas tanks are mysteriously refilled, and mechanical problems that left people stranded simply don't exist anymore. It's as if Sheriff Marcus Coleman is still out there, still protecting travelers on his stretch of highway, still making sure that everyone gets home safely. So the next time you find yourself driving through the desert Southwest, particularly on those lonely stretches of old Route 66, pay attention to your rearview mirror. If your car breaks down near a cluster of abandoned buildings that maps forgot to mention, and you see headlights approaching through the darkness, remember Sheriff Marcus Coleman. Remember that some guardians never abandon their post, even when that post exists somewhere between this world and the next.